Hello, everyone. Welcome to Readings in English, the channel where we dive into the beauty of the English language through captivating stories. Whether you're here to improve your English skills or simply enjoy a good tale, you're in the right place. English is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world, connecting people across continents. Learning it is like opening a door to endless opportunities, whether it's for travel, work, or simply understanding stories from different cultures. Through our stories, we aim to make learning English enjoyable, engaging, and meaningful. Today, I'm thrilled to share a powerful and inspiring story with you. It's called Whispers of Freedom, and it takes us on an emotional journey to a small African village. This story follows Naomi, a young woman who teaches herself English to share her community's struggles and traditions with the world. Her journey is filled with challenges, triumphs, and the transformative power of storytelling. As we explore this story together, pay close attention to the vocabulary and phrases. Not only will you experience an incredible narrative, but you'll also pick up valuable language skills along the way. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into Whispers of Freedom. I hope this story touches your heart as much as it did mine. Naomi balanced the clay pot on her head, her steps steady as she walked along the dusty path back to her village. The sun beat down mercilessly, painting the landscape in a golden haze. Around her, children chased each other barefoot, their laughter filling the air, a stark contrast to the murmurs of adults gathered under the baobab tree in the village square. Naomi's gaze lingered on them for a moment. Their discussions were always the same: scarcity of food, lack of clean water, and the distant hope for government aid. Her village, nestled in the heart of West Africa, was a place of beauty and struggle. The soil was rich but untamed, and the people were resilient but burdened. Yet, amidst these challenges, the villagers clung to their stories. Every evening, they would gather around the fire, weaving tales of their ancestors, mythical creatures, and lessons for the future. Naomi loved these moments. She would sit close to her grandmother, Mama Ayo, her eyes wide with wonder as the words painted vivid images in her mind, but the stories never left the village. Naomi had always wondered what it would be like if the world could hear their tales, if their struggles and triumphs would reach beyond the hills that bordered their small community. This dream, however, felt as distant as the clouds above. Naomi had never been to school. Her family couldn't afford it. The only language she knew was her native tongue, and she could only imagine the complexities of English, the language spoken by the few outsiders who occasionally visited the region. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Naomi sat outside her home, the clay pot now emptied of water. Mama Ayo joined her, humming a tune from her youth. Naomi hesitated before speaking. "Grandmother, do you think our stories could ever reach the world?" Mama Ayo chuckled softly. "Our stories are like seeds, child. They may not reach far, but they grow where they are planted, Naomi nodded, though her heart yearned for more. The following week brought an unexpected disruption. A group of foreigners arrived in the village in a jeep, their cameras and notebooks a sharp contrast to the simple surroundings. Word spread quickly and a crowd gathered as the journalists set up their equipment near the village square. Naomi watched from a distance, curiosity piqued. She had never seen people like them before, with their pale skin and hurried movements. As the head journalist, a man named Mark tried to communicate with the villagers. Frustration built on both sides. The language barrier was insurmountable. Some villagers gestured wildly, while others resorted to laughter, making light of the awkward attempts. Naomi's chest tightened. Their stories, so rich and meaningful, were being reduced to incoherent fragments. Naomi stepped closer, unnoticed by the crowd. She caught sight of a small book slipping out of Mark's bag-of-pocket English dictionary. He seemed oblivious as it fell to the ground during their flurry of activity. Naomi hesitated for a moment before picking it up, her fingers brushing against the worn pages. It felt heavy with possibilities. By the time the journalists left, Naomi's heart was racing. She held on to the dictionary tightly, her mind spinning with questions. She could barely recognize the letters, let alone form words, but she knew this could be her first step towards something greater. That evening, after the villagers dispersed and the air grew cooled, Naomi sat by the dim light of a lantern, flipping through the pages. Mama Ayo entered the room and noticed the book in Naomi's hands. "What is that, child?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "A chance," Naomi replied, determination settling in her voice. "It's a chance to learn, to tell our stories to the world." Mama Ayo sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she placed a comforting hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Then start small, child. Even the tallest trees began as tiny seeds." As the lantern flickered, Naomi traced the letters on the first page, her journey just beginning. Naomi's mornings had always been busy with chores, fetching water, helping Mama Ayu tend to their small garden, and weaving mats to sell in the market. But now her evenings were reserved for a new obsession, the English dictionary. She would sit near the flickering lantern light, the book open on her lap, mouthing words she didn't fully understand. The symbols on the pages were foreign and intimidating, but Naomi had never felt so determined. She started by associating the English words with items in her home: chair, pot, water. She repeated the words over and over, her tongue fumbling with unfamiliar sounds. Mama Ayo often watched silently from a corner, her expression a mix of pride and worrying. "You push yourself too hard, Naomi. Rest is as important as effort," she would say. But Naomi only smiled, her tired eyes glinting with excitement. One evening, as she struggled with a sentence, a thought struck her. The stories she had grown up hearing, the tales of her ancestors, and the lessons they carried were vivid and full of meaning. Could she capture them in this new language? The idea felt both thrilling and impossible. How could she convey the richness of her culture through words she barely understood? Determined to try, Naomi picked a simple story Mama Ayo had told her as a child. It was about a small bird that outsmarted a lion to protect its family. With a piece of charcoal, she began to write, using the dictionary to translate words into English. The result was clumsy and fragmented, but it was a start. The next morning, she showed her work to Daniel, the young teacher who ran informal classes for children in the village. Daniel adjusted his glasses as he read the text, his expression shifting between amusement and admiration. "You're teaching yourself English?" he asked, surprised. Naomi nodded. "I want to share our stories, but I don't know if I'm doing it right," Daniel smiled. "It's a good start, but learning a language takes time and patience. If you're serious, I can help you." For the first time, Naomi felt that her dream might not be so far out of reach. Under Daniel's guidance, Naomi's lessons became more structured. He loaned her a few notebooks and encouraged her to write simple sentences. Together, they practiced basic grammar and vocabulary. Naomi was a quick learner, but every success was met with new challenges. One day, while they were practicing near the village square, a group of women passed by carrying bundles of firewood. One of them, Akua, paused and called out, "Naomi, what are you doing?" "Writing love letters to the foreigners." The other women burst into laughter, and Naomi's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Daniel started to respond, but Naomi held up a hand. She faced Akua and said firmly, "I'm learning to tell our stories. One day the world will hear them." The women looked surprised but continued on their way. Daniel grinned. "You've got courage, Naomi. That's half the battle." That evening, Naomi returned to her writing. She worked on the story of the bird and the lion, refining it with Daniel's help. Slowly, the words began to flow more naturally, though her sentences were still simple. Each time she finished a draft, she read it aloud to Mama Ayo, who would nod approvingly. But Naomi's newfound confidence was tested when Daniel told her about a storytelling contest he had seen advertised in a magazine. "The theme is voices from the unheard. It's perfect for you," he said, handing her a torn page with the contest details. Naomi hesitated. "I'm not ready." "My English isn't good enough. You're better than you think," Daniel replied. "You've got the passion and the stories. That's what matters." Naomi spent the next few nights debating with herself. Could she really send her story to people outside the village? What if they didn't understand it, or worse, laughed at her efforts? Yet, deep down, she knew she had to try. One late night, after Mama Ayo had gone to bed, Naomi picked up her notebook and began rewriting her story with more care. She felt a mixture of fear and hope, but as the words filled the page, she reminded herself of Daniel's advice. Passion and stories were what truly mattered. Naomi placed the final period on her story and leaned back, her hands trembling. The small notebook sat on the wooden table, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. She had poured every ounce of her effort into retelling the tale of the bird and the lion, this time in English. The contest required typed entries, so Daniel offered to help. He borrowed an old typewriter from a neighboring school and spent an entire afternoon typing Naomi's story. As the rhythmic clacking of keys filled the air, Naomi hovered nervously nearby, pointing out corrections and asking for adjustments. When the story was finally ready, Naomi stared at the neat stack of papers in disbelief. This was at the culmination of her dream so far. Yet, as Daniel packed the papers into an envelope, Dot crept in. "What if they don't like it?" she asked. Daniel adjusted his glasses and gave her an encouraging smile. "It's not about them liking it. It's about you trying. That's what matters." Naomi nodded, but the uncertainty lingered. She spent the next few days watching as the villagers carried on with their lives, oblivious to her quiet determination. The only person who truly understood was Mama Ayo, who encouraged her to keep going. Finally, the day came to send the story. Daniel accompanied Naomi to the town's small post office, where the clerk weighed the envelope and stamped it. As the clerk handed Naomi the receipt, she stared at it for a long moment. This simple piece of paper represented something much larger, a step toward sharing her voice with the world. As they walked back to the village, Daniel turned to her and said, "Now we wait," but waiting was its own challenge. Naomi busied herself with chores and lessons, but her mind constantly wandered back to the contest. She imagined what the judges might think of her story and whether they would even understand its deeper meaning. Late one night, as she stared up at the stars, Mama Ayo joined her outside. "The seeds you plant now will take time to grow," her grandmother said softly. "Be patient, child." Naomi nodded, drawing strength from her words. Whatever happened, she had taken the first step. Weeks passed, and Naomi began to settle back into her routine. Yet there was a subtle change in her demeanor. Her evenings were still spent practicing English, but now there was a sense of purpose driving her. One afternoon, while she was helping Mama Ayo shell peanuts, a group of villagers approached. Among them was Akua, who had previously mocked Naomi's efforts. This time her tone was curious rather than derisive. "What have you been doing with all that writing?" Akua asked. Naomi hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I submitted a story to a contest," she finally admitted. The villagers exchanged skeptical looks. One of the men chuckled. "And you think they'll pick a story from here? From someone like you?" The words stung, but Naomi held her ground. "It doesn't matter if they pick it. What matters is that I try." Mama Ayo placed a firm hand on Naomi's shoulder, signaling her silent support. The group eventually dispersed, leaving Naomi with a mix of frustration and pride. That evening, Daniel visited with news. "I received a letter from the contest organizers," he said, holding up a small envelope. Naomi's heart raced as she took the letter and carefully opened it. Inside was a polite acknowledgment of her submission. While it wasn't an acceptance, it was proof that her story had reached the judges. They received it, she whispered, a smile breaking across her face. Daniel grinned. That's a victory in itself. Encouraged by the small milestone, Naomi decided to write more stories. She began documenting the daily lives of the villagers, capturing their resilience and traditions. Each story was a step forward, a testament to her growing confidence. But as her efforts gained momentum, so did the resistance from some villagers. They accused her of wasting time on a skill that wouldn't feed or clothe anyone. Naomi struggled to ignore their criticisms, finding solace in the support of Mama Iyo and Daniel. One evening, as Naomi read aloud her latest story to Mama Iyo, her grandmother smiled. "You're doing something important, Naomi. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Naomi nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey was far from over, but she was determined to see it through, no matter the obstacles. The morning air was crisp as Naomi walked toward the village square, her notebook tucked tightly under her arm. She had written another story, this one about the hardships faced during the dry season, and wanted to share it with Daniel. Her confidence was growing, and with it, a small spark of hope that her stories might one day be heard widely. As she approached, Daniel greeted her with an awkward smile. In his hand, he held a magazine. Naomi's curiosity piqued, and she tilted her head. "What's that?" she asked. Daniel hesitated before handing it to her. The magazine's glossy pages were a stark contrast to the simplicity of their surroundings. Naomi's eyes widened as she flipped through it, stopping abruptly on a familiar set of words, her story. Printed in English. For a brief moment, her heart soared. Then, she noticed something was missing: her name. There was no acknowledgement that the story belonged to her. "I sent your story to this magazine," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "I thought it might have a better chance there." Naomi's hands trembled as she stared at him. "Without telling me." "Without giving me the chance to decide." "I was trying to help," he said defensively. "You wouldn't have sent it yourself." "You're too cautious." Naomi's chest tightened, anger and hurt bubbling to the surface. "It wasn't your decision to make. You stole my voice, Daniel." "How could you?" Daniel's face fell, but Naomi didn't wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked away, clutching the magazine tightly. Tears blurred her vision as she retreated to the solitude of her home. That evening, Mama Iyo found her sitting in the dimly lit room, the magazine crumpled beside her. "What's wrong, child?" she asked gently. Naomi explained through choked words, her frustration spilling out. "He didn't trust me to make my own choices. He took something precious and made it his." Mama Iyo's expression was somber. "Betrayal is a heavy weight, but you must decide how you carry it. Will it crush you, or will it make you stronger?" Naomi looked at her grandmother, her words resonating. She didn't know the answer yet, but she vowed to find it. The following days were a blur of emotions for Naomi. The betrayal by Daniel left a bitter taste, but the sight of her story in print reminded her of her dream. It had reached people beyond the village, even if it wasn't on her terms. Could she turn this pain into something meaningful? Determined to confront the situation, Naomi returned to the village square, where Daniel was teaching his students. She waited until he was alone before approaching. "We need to talk," she said firmly. Daniel looked up, guilt etched on his face. "Naomi, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You did," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the hurt. "But I won't let it stop me. If anything, this has shown me that I need to take control of my own story." Daniel nodded solemnly. "I understand. If there's anything I can do to make it right, I'll decide that." She interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Back home, Naomi unfolded the magazine and read her story again. For the first time, she saw it as others might, a glimpse into her world. The realization gave her a strange sense of power. If this story could move beyond the village, what else could she achieve if she kept pushing forward? The villagers' opinions, however, remained divided. While some praised Naomi for having her story published, others dismissed it as a foolish pursuit. Akua, always quick to criticize, sneered as Naomi passed by. "So you're famous now. Did it make you rich?" Naomi ignored the comment, refusing to let it derail her focus. She had learned a painful lesson, but was determined to channel it into growth. Late one evening, Naomi began drafting a letter to the magazine's editor. She wrote in her clearest English, demanding recognition for her work. Each word fell like a reclamation of her voice, a step toward regaining what she had lost. When the letter was finished, she stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She placed it in an envelope, her heart steady with resolve. This time, her voice would be heard on her own terms. Naomi watched as the postmaster stamped her envelope, marking it for delivery. Her hands trembled as she let go, releasing the letter that carried her words, her story, and her demand for justice. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of control over her destiny. Back in the village, life carried on as usual. The dry season was at its peak, and the daily struggle for water and food consumed everyone's energy. Naomi threw herself into her chores, trying to distract herself from the gnawing uncertainty of whether her letter would make any difference. At night, however, she couldn't help but think about what might come next. Would the magazine respond? Would they acknowledge their mistake? Or would they ignore her entirely? The unknown kept her awake, staring at the ceiling as Mama Aho's steady breathing filled the silence. One afternoon, while walking back from the market, Daniel approached her cautiously. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by hesitance. "Naomi," he began, "I heard you wrote to the magazine." She nodded but said nothing, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. I just wanted to say ... I admire your courage. You're doing something I wouldn't have dared to do," he said softly. Naomi glanced at him. Her anger toward him softened, but not erased. "It's not about courage, Daniel. It's about reclaiming what's mine." Daniel smiled faintly. "Still, it's inspiring." That evening, Naomi sat with her notebook, writing a new story. This time, it was about a young girl who found her voice after years of silence. The words flowed more easily now, each sentence carrying a weight that felt deliberate and purposeful. Weeks passed before Naomi heard anything. She had almost resigned herself to silence when Daniel appeared at her door, a wide grin on his face. "You have to see this," he said, holding a phone. Naomi frowned in confusion, but followed him to the village square, where a small crowd had gathered around a shopkeeper's television. On the screen was a news program featuring Naomi's story. A journalist had discovered her letter and shared it on social media, where it had gone viral. The journalist spoke passionately about Naomi's determination and the importance of giving credit to marginalized voices. Naomi's picture appeared on the screen, her words quoted directly from the letter. The villagers gasped and murmured among themselves, their earlier skepticism replaced with awe. Naomi stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had hope for acknowledgement, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. The following days were a whirlwind. Visitors from nearby towns came to the village, curious to meet Naomi. Some brought cameras and microphones, eager to hear her stories firsthand. For someone who had spent her entire life in relative obscurity, the attention was overwhelming. At first, Naomi struggled to find the right words during interviews. Her English was far from perfect, and she often stumbled, searching for phrases in her limited vocabulary. But with each conversation, her confidence grew. The journalist seemed more interested in her passion and perseverance than in her fluency. The villagers, once dismissive of Naomi's efforts, began to see her in a new light. Akua approached her one morning, her usual sarcasm replaced with genuine curiosity. "You've done something incredible, Naomi," she admitted. "Maybe there's more to this English business than I thought." Naomi smiled, accepting the olive branch. "It's not just about English, Akua. It's about telling our stories, letting the world see who we are." Mama Aya watched these changes with quiet pride, often reminding Naomi to stay grounded. "The world may hear your voice now," she said one evening, "but never forget where it came from." As Naomi continued to write and share her stories, the magazine finally responded. They issued a public apology, acknowledging their mistake and offering Naomi an opportunity to collaborate with them on future projects. The gesture, though small, felt like a victory. Encouraged by this, Naomi decided to take her storytelling further. She began organizing gatherings in the village, teaching others the basics of English and encouraging them to write their own stories. Slowly, the skepticism that had once surrounded her efforts turned into collective enthusiasm. One evening, As the villagers sat under the baobab tree, Naomi stood before them with her notebook. She read aloud a story she had written about their struggles during the dry season, her voice steady and strong. When she finished, there was silence, followed by applause. For the first time, Naomi felt truly at home in her dream. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about her community, their voices, and their shared future. As the crowd dispersed, she sat with Mama Ayo, gazing at the stars. "You've planted something special, child," Mama Ayo said, her tone warm. "Now, let's see how it grows." Naomi smiled, her heart full of hope. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following Naomi's newfound recognition were a whirlwind of activity. Journalists and visitors from neighboring towns continued to arrive, their questions and cameras making the once quiet village a hub of attention. Naomi found herself pulled into a world she had only imagined, where her stories and her voice mattered beyond the confines of her home. One afternoon, she sat with a young journalist named Claire, who had come from the city to document Naomi's journey. Claire's recorder sat on the table between them, its red light blinking steadily. "Naomi, what made you decide to start writing in English?" Claire asked. Naomi hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the hills that framed the village. "It wasn't about English. Really, it was about telling our stories. English was just the bridge to reach people who wouldn't otherwise hear us." Claire nodded, impressed. "And what's next for you? Now that the world is listening?" Naomi smiled faintly. "I want to teach others to find their voices. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us." As Claire packed her equipment, she handed Naomi a small gift, a set of notebooks and pens. "For your future stories," she said with a warm smile. Naomi accepted them with gratitude, already imagining the words she would fill them with. However, not everyone in the village embraced the changes. While many were proud of Naomi's achievements, others saw the attention as a disruption. Some whispered that Naomi had forgotten her roots, that she was chasing a dream that wouldn't feed their children or fill their wells. One evening, Akua approached Naomi near the baobab tree. "You think your stories will bring us water or make our fields fertile?" she asked, her tone sharp. "We need action, not words." Naomi's chest tightened, but she met Akua's gaze calmly. "Words are a kind of action. They can open doors, bring help, and change how people see us." "Isn't that worth trying?" Akua didn't respond, but her expression softened slightly before she walked away. Naomi sighed, knowing she couldn't change everyone's mind. Her focus had to remain on those who believed in her vision. Despite the tension, Naomi pushed forward. With the help of Daniel and a few other villagers, she organized weekly storytelling gatherings under the baobab tree. Children and adults alike came to listen, and some even began sharing their own tales. Naomi encouraged them to write, offering simple lessons in English to those who wanted to learn. One evening, Mama Ayo shared a story about her youth, recounting a time when the village had banded together to overcome a devastating flood. Her voice was steady, her words rich with emotion. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Naomi felt a swell of pride for her grandmother. But not everyone attended these gatherings. Akua and others who shared her skepticism stayed away, their absence a silent protest. Naomi couldn't help but feel the weight of their disapproval, even as the gatherings grew more popular. The turning point came when Naomi received an invitation from the city to speak at a literacy event. The organizers had heard about her journey and wanted her to inspire others with her story. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant leaving the village for a few days. When Naomi shared the news at the next gathering, the reactions were mixed. Some cheered, excited for her to represent their community. Others, like Akua, remained critical. "So you're leaving us now?" Akua said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "What good will that do here?" Before Naomi could respond, Mama Ayo stood. "Let the child go," she said firmly. "She carries our stories with her, and through her, they will travel farther than we ever could." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Akua fell silent. Naomi felt a surge of gratitude for her grandmother's unwavering support. She knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to prove that her words could make a difference. The day of her departure arrived quickly. As Naomi boarded the small bus to the city, she looked back at the villagers gathered to see her off. Mama Ayo's proud smile and Daniel's encouraging wave stood out among the crowd. Naomi clutched her notebook tightly, bound to return with stories of hope and progress. As the bus rumbled away, Naomi felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The city was unfamiliar, its pace much faster than her quiet village, but it was also full of possibilities. This was her chance to show the world what her community had to offer, and she intended to make the most of it. The city bustled with energy as Naomi stepped off the bus. Tall buildings lined the streets, and the hum of traffic was a stark contrast to the quiet rhythm of her village. She clutched her notebook tightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and intimidation. A representative from the literacy event greeted her warmly, guiding her to the venue where she would speak. The auditorium was large, with rows of chairs filling the space and a podium at the front. Naomi felt a pang of doubt. Could her words, born in the simplicity of her village, hold meaning in a place so grand? When her turn to speak came, Naomi hesitated for a moment. She glanced at the audience, journalists, educators, and city residents all waiting expectantly. Taking a deep breath, she opened her notebook and began. "I come from a small village," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "A place where our struggles are great, but our stories are greater. Learning English was my way of sharing those stories, of giving my community a voice beyond our borders." As she spoke, her confidence grew. She shared the tale of the bird and the lion, weaving in lessons about resilience and hope. By the time she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Naomi's eyes stung with tears of relief and pride. After the event, several attendees approached her, eager to learn more about her village and her work. Some offered resources to help her continue teaching English back home, while others expressed interest in reading more of her stories. Naomi was overwhelmed but grateful. For the first time, she felt that her efforts were not only recognized but also supported. Back in the village, word of Naomi's success spread quickly. The villagers who had doubted her began to see her work in a new light. Even Akua approached her one evening, her tone softer than before. "Maybe I was wrong about all this," she admitted. "You've done something I didn't think was possible." Naomi smiled, her anger toward Akua replaced with understanding. "It's not too late to join us, Akua. The door is always open, but with success came sacrifices." Naomi spent long hours teaching and writing, often neglecting her own rest. Mama Ayo, ever perceptive, noticed the toll it was taking on her. "Child," she said one night, "even the strongest roots can break if they're stretched too far. Remember to care for yourself as much as you care for others." Naomi nodded, realizing the truth in her grandmother's words. She promised herself to find balance, knowing her journey was far from over. With her newfound resources, Naomi expanded her storytelling gatherings into a community program. She worked with Daniel to establish a small learning center under the baobab tree, where villagers of all ages could come to learn English and share their stories. The first project was a collaborative book, a collection of stories written by the villagers in both English and their native language. Naomi guided them through the process, offering encouragement and feedback. The project not only strengthened their skills, but also brought the community closer together. One evening, as the book neared completion, Naomi gathered the villagers for a celebration. They sat around the fire, each person taking turns reading their stories aloud. The pride in their voices was palpable, and Naomi felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what she had dreamed of, not just sharing her own stories, but empowering others to do the same. The book was eventually published with the help of a city-based organization. Copies were distributed to schools and libraries across the region, showcasing the rich culture and resilience of Naomi's village. The project gained attention from media outlets, further cementing Naomi's role as a voice for her community. Despite the growing recognition, Naomi remained grounded. She continued to live simply, spending her days teaching and writing, and her evenings with Mama Ayo under the stars. One night, her grandmother looked at her with pride. "You've done more than I ever imagined, child. The seeds you've planted will grow for generations." Naomi smiled, her heart full. "It wasn't just me, grandmother. It was all of us." As the village thrived with its newfound sense of purpose, Naomi began drafting her next story, a tale of a girl who dared to dream beyond her boundaries and found a way to bring her world with her. This time she didn't write for recognition or success. She wrote because she believed in the power of stories to heal, unite, and inspire. The baobab tree, once a symbol of tradition, now stood as a beacon of progress, its roots grounded in the past and its branches reaching for the future. Naomi looked at it with a sense of quiet triumph. Her journey had brought her far, but she knew there was still more to explore.